Hey everybody, we're back again, and we want to welcome you to Lift Off for Brother Jacky. How exciting it is to be able to be with all of you that are tuned in today. It's always exciting, and I thank God that you've made that decision to listen to this podcast. Hey, before we dive in today, I want to remind you that you can go to jcimpact.org. You can go to all kind of places and get this. So please share it and let your friends know about it. Today, as we dive into Lift Off for Brother Jacky, I'm so excited today to have my guest Todd Geralds with us today. He's the son of legendary Alabama high school coach Tandy Geralds. And man, God has done so much through the dad and the son. Todd has witnessed God's transforming grace and his dad working at Woodlawn High School through his dad's life. Todd is honored to tell the amazing story of redemption and what happened during that time. So Todd, welcome aboard, man. It's an honor to have you. I love you and your family so much.
We love you, Brother
y'all
Jacky.
mean so much to me, man. So thanks for coming and being with us today.
Thank you so much. We love you. And you know, we don't even go to your church, but we feel like we're a part of
Oh,
it.
you are, brother. You are. Well, we're part of the big family of God,
well,
right?
The Big C Church.
That's right.
That's
right.
And this is really cool what you're doing here. You're kind of gotten all high tech on us, Brother
Yeah,
Jacky.
well, Brad's helped me with that. I'm gonna tell you, Brad's he's the pivot point of that.
It's nice.
And
it's a good
so,
setup.
hey Todd, let's dive in for a minute and talk about the story of Woodlawn. What inspired you to tell the story?
Well, you know, it's one of these things like a lot of people may have seen the movie. And if you saw the movie, there was a little boy that tagged along with his dad to work sometime. That was me as a child. So it's a story I've known since I was a kid. And over the years, it's not like the story ended then. That was a big part of my dad's life. He came to Christ through that process. Ultimately, I came to Christ through a similar process. Dad was coaching at another high school in Tuscumbia, Alabama, called Deschler High School. And instead of having to be talked into letting some Christian folks come in to talk to the kids, he had them come in.
Yeah, right.
And I prayed to receive Christ at camp there. And so this was a big part of my life. And over the years, I went off and played college football at Jacksonville State. And the more I got around other people and realized how remarkable this story was, you know, I would talk to a lot of my black friends from little towns, and I would hear how things were. And I'd seen racism, like in my mind, kind of eradicated. Even when we got up to Tuscumbia, I was like, wow, there's still a lot of separation here. There's not the unity, you know.
Yeah.
And so I'd seen that what God did there, He's the only one who can change hearts. And so it just became a big part of my own testimony, is seeing what God had done as a small child changed my whole outlook, you know. And as I became a Christian, I realized this is all because of Jesus. This is why people love whatever you look like, wherever you come from, you love. That's what He calls us to. And so as a 30-ish something year old, my dad was dying of cancer, and I was living in Pennsylvania at the time. And I knew that my young children, I just had my third daughter. I have four daughters. And
you're surviving.
Exactly.
Right?
I am. Yeah. And now I've got grandbabies, which is nice. But I knew they weren't going to know this story, not from their pop. They called my dad Pop. Now I'm called Pop by my grandkids. But so I decided I was going to travel from Pennsylvania, use vacation time, just while he was battling cancer. He had lung cancer, and he didn't have a good prognosis. If God didn't heal him, he was going to die in a very short time. Mm-hmm. And he did. He died 6 months from his diagnosis. But I used those 6 months to spend time with him. And I was like, Dad, I know the story, but I'm going to act like I'm a news reporter. And I'm going to have my back when we had the little tape,
I remember.
The small tape,
Yeah.
would record conversations with him, and just went back and started typing stuff out back then. And I'd just been piddling with it for years. And but the whole reason I wanted to do that was I wanted my daughters to know that story, and I wanted it to be well documented. Didn't have any plan really for it to be some major thing. But one day I had pulled into the Planet Fitness parking lot down in Pelham and was about to go exercise, and a phone rang, and I didn't recognize the number, but I picked it up, and these days I might not have picked it up because there's so much spam these days. I picked it up, and it was John Irwin, and he said, "We want to talk to you about a story." For those of you who don't know, Andy and John Irwin have a movie company, and they've made a number of movies. They did I Can Only Imagine. They've done a number of different things.
I Can Only Imagine too.
Yeah, and then the Jesus Revolution. Lots of great movies, and I love those guys. And when they called me, I knew what they were calling me about because Hank Irwin, their father, had been my dad's chaplain on that football team. And so I was like, yeah, I'll come talk to you. So we sat down, and they started talking to me, and they had cameras all around. It was similar to this, and they were filming the conversation that we were having. And at the end of the conversation, they slid a contract across the table and said, we want to do this movie based on your book. And I was like, I hadn't even finished the book yet. And so they knew that. They knew that I would probably need help, which I enlisted a guy named Mark Schleybaugh, who is an ESPN talking head, who's written a lot of books. Great guy, believer. He's a big Georgia fan, which I kind of hold against him a little bit. But,
yeah, I got you, man. I get it.
Beyond that, he's a really good guy. And we hammered this thing out. Mark did a lot of work helping with that, but it was a fun time. And the movie came out. The book came out shortly before the movie, and it just God ended up taking that and doing amazing things. Found out years later that it had been played in United Arab Emirates, in a world like a totally Muslim part of the world. And so the gospel's getting out, because one thing that John and Andy do in their movies is the gospel is going to be clear.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, you're right.
And it was great.
So Todd, let's rewind our mind a minute, right back to your dad, your little boy at Woodlawn. What was the spiritual pivot point at that moment with your dad and the whole big picture? Talk to us a minute about that significant moment when everything changed.
Yeah, and it's a very clear moment. And some people don't have that clear moment. They come to Christ, and it's almost like they wake up one day and realize, somewhere back here I started believing this.
Right, yeah.
And I've committed myself to it. My dad's was a pretty strong moment. So the movie combines two characters into one. And when you're making movies, the more characters you have, the more actors you pay, and it can get to be a bit much. So they combined Hank Irwin and Wales Goebel into one character. Wales Goebel, you may know Wales. Wales, just amazing man. And at that time, he was really working primarily with high schools and doing a lot with athletics because he had been an athlete in college. And he came and asked my dad, could he talk to the team? He shared the gospel with the team. The whole team came to Christ. There were 4 guys on the team who had been Christians already. The rest were not, but they all were after that night.
Wow! So that was a really significant night when the gospel was presented.
Yeah.
Was it in a locker room? It was in
the gym. At Woodlawn
Gotcha.
High School. And my dad sat there, did not come to Christ, but he said even then he got a little misty-eyed because he could tell something big was going on, and I think he was a little skeptical that this is just an emotional thing,
Yeah.
But he also was very motivated to win, and he was saying, well, if it's bringing these guys together, But I think there was a little cynicism there, and you played ball and stuff, and I think he thought, we're going to continue out here in the heat, and things are going to be rough, and let's see how long this lasts, before they start pointing fingers at each other. But it actually got stronger. He continued to see them bond more and more. And so there was the kids decided the week before school started, so it would be like the Friday night before next Friday is going to be the first game. They decided to have an FCA meeting at one of the other students' homes. And they got over there, and Dad went in, and he, when sometimes you see people in another environment, like you used to might run into your school teacher at the mall.
Yeah.
And it was kind of weird. It's just like, oh, they're a real person. Well, so Dad saw these kids all together. He saw the family welcoming these kids in, all of them, black, white, everything. And again, this was early 70s Birmingham, Alabama, and it was different. Home was in Crestwood, which was upper middle class at the time, Dad just saw this love they had for each other, and they were there not because they had to be. They all wanted to be there together, and they were cutting up, guys hugging on each other, and he just thought, I don't have that, and he slipped out the back and started driving home. He was driving his old Volkswagen wagon, if you remember those that they used to have, and he started talking to this God that he wasn't sure up to that point existed. But he said, I want that. I want that love they have. I want to be able to love like they do. And he got home and got on his knees next to the bed and was a new man, And,
wow.
And a lot of his life you would look at and see a lot of the same activities. He was still coaching, but his motivation was changing. And it was about those kids and loving them well. But it was a pivotal moment. It was that. And it was Howie Miller was a sophomore, I think, offensive lineman at the time, and he was one of the 4 believers before Wells came and preached. And his family had raised him in a Christian home, and to them, having 40, young 17, 18-year-old kids in their house was just what you're supposed to do, and the Bible calls us to that. And they had them in there, and you never know the little just. I think we all dream of doing spectacular things for God, but God calls us to love and obey and let him do the spectacular. And, Miss Miller opened her home, had no idea till 30 years later that, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment, but that just that simple act had played a pivotal role in my dad coming to know Jesus. So.
There's so much here that I want to pick out of you in this. While you're tuned in, I know you're inspired by watching this, but Todd authored the book Woodlawn, and the movie was out of that book that really was monumental. If you've never read the book, never watched the movie, you need to dig into that because it is really inspirational. So, Todd, let's go back to you. I want to pick out of your brain a few things with this. Let's talk, first of all, about, let's go to the Miss Miller deal. You said you wanted to talk about that?
Yeah.
Give it to me, man.
So, much to a good friend of mine who's in the building today, his chagrin, my dad played ball at Auburn, and so I was raised up as an Auburn fan. And I was on a message board one day, and the book had come out, the movie had come out, and there was a guy on the board said, by any chance, do you remember if your dad ever said anything about coming to an FCA meeting at someone's house? And I said, let's get off the board, and went to the private message or whatever and said, yeah, that's, he said, that was my house. I'm so-and-so Miller. It wasn't Howie, but it was one of his brothers. And I asked him if his mom was still alive and stuff. They had no idea that Dad left and came to Christ after that. And so I was able to tell them, and then tell him. And by the way, if you go to like page 89 in the book, your mom's name is in there.
She's in there.
Your family. This was a pivotal thing in your life. And I think that that's one of those things that when you're planting seeds, you may not ever know. I mean, in this particular case, they found out literally like 40 years later,
Wow.
But that just their simple act of obedience and hospitality, which we're called to, and it's not always easy to do that. But,
right.
But that was simple. That wasn't something extravagant. It may have been extravagant to have all those kids in the house, but it was a simple act of obedience and love that years later, it was in the context of this is about Jesus, and they found out, oh, wow. That's a big deal.
Well, it certainly goes right into the reality of biblical teaching that our works follow us.
Yeah.
As we move on into eternity, that's not the end of our journey, even on earth,
right?
Because our works follow us. And it's like you said, 30 years later, those things are still impacting people's lives.
Right. Absolutely.
And how amazing is that? God is so good, isn't he, Todd?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about your dad was transformed by the power of the Holy Spirit in Jesus Christ. How did that affect the home life?
It was different, and it was not. He was still tough. He was, God doesn't take our personalities away. He channels, himself through those things and purifies them and makes them pretty, sometimes.
I got you.
But we still have, he had bumps, and he was rough around the edges for a while, but his motivation for things changed, and I never ever questioned that he loved well. Even at his funeral, I can remember. So you know me, and you and I are similar in this, that we just love people, want to be around people, and eat that up. My dad told me one day, he said, "Son, I wish I was more like you, but I just don't like people that much." and I shared that at his funeral. I said, "But I'll tell you one thing he did. He loved people, because I like everybody. If I find something in common with you, man, we're going to have a good time and talk about that, Dad told people what they needed to hear, not what they wanted to hear. Mm-hmm. That takes somebody who really loves you to do that. And he always did that. And sometimes that rubbed people the wrong way. But early on, things just changed. We started going to church. I started hearing the gospel. So when I came to Christ, I was in high school, but I had been hearing it since then. And I'd walk the aisle, and I may have been a believer as about 11-year-old. I got baptized then, but when I know that I had this turning point was when I was a junior in high school at football camp, hearing this guy that my dad had come in to share the gospel with us. And I think that there's a lot of people who kind of share journeys like that. But yeah, I mean, his love for us was probably one of the biggest things. And behaviors did change. Mm-hmm. He used to drink fairly heavily and stuff. That kind of faded away, and faded it to where he didn't drink at all years later. But just a good man. He really, all the players who ever played for him from that point on would tell you they'd run through a wall for him because they knew he loved them. It was about them. And he was still hard on himself. He always wanted to make sure that he gave every player, the best opportunity to win. And Tony Nathan, who's friends with Jeremiah, who you'll speak with later, when I asked him about comparing the coaches he played for, Bear Bryant, Coach Bryant, and Coach Shula, and my dad, he said, I won't say what he said about Coach Shula, but he said it's a professional, it's a different way that they deal with folks. But he said Coach Bryant and your dad were almost identical in terms of how they handled their players and how they loved their players, and that it was about the players. And I thought that was one of the biggest, compliments he could give someone, because I think, as you'll hear any of Coach Bryant's old players say, they knew he loved them.
Oh, yeah.
And it was about them.
Well, you used the term twice already in this podcast that I picked up on, that give us a little bit more of, you said twice already, your dad's motivation changed.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It's funny. I was talking to somebody recently about why I work the way I do. And and this was a person I did not know if they were a believer or not. And so I said, well, I don't want you to think I'm weird or anything, but my faith is why I work the way I do. I'm called to be excellent in what I do. I'm working as unto Him. And that was the motivation, that internal motivation. And it was from a place of love. Jesus in John 13:34 and 35 said, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another." And this is the big part. "As I have loved you."
Come on.
"And by this the world will know that you're my disciples." Not by all the words you say, but by how you love. Do you love like I did? And how did Jesus love? He gave himself up for people. And my dad, that motivation, became very apparent in him. Was he perfect? No, none of us are.
I got you.
But you could tell what his motivation was, and he had this driving, desire to please God with what he did. And I think we can get out of balance with that, because God's pleased with us because of what Jesus did.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And we can get to be, very, very hard on ourselves. And He's saying, "Hey, I was hard on Jesus. You're good."
That is an incredible revelation there. And one of the things I'm picking up on with you, Todd, is that your dad was a man's man. He was a man's man before he come to Christ. He was a man's man after he come to Christ. But you really tied the bow in the significant difference of the motivation that changed.
Sure.
I think that we all recognize that before Christ, we're living for ourselves.
Yes.
And the motivation certainly can be perverted in that. But after Christ, the motivation changes, it doesn't make you less of a man's man, does it?
Not at all. And that's funny because I almost named my second book something along the lines of Jesus would have been a good free safety.
That's a good word.
Well, my dad used to always say, I think he would have been a good free safety. You know, he had to be lean and probably he wasn't a real big guy, but you know he was tough. You know, he's walking around in the deserts, and he was talking about Jesus. Like, Jesus was a man's man.
Right.
And there's no doubt Jesus was a man's man.
Yes, absolutely.
And he was a tough person. I mean, he did some things that if he wasn't, he wouldn't have gotten away with. I mean, he turned over tables and came with a whip and drove people out. He was forceful when he needed to be. He was gentle when he needed to be.
Yes.
And that was my dad. My dad had 2 daughters as well as a son, so you can guess who got the brunt of a lot of stuff. But he was so sweet on my sister.
Yeah, I got you.
And my little sister might have been the most spoiled little girl ever, probably with my dad. But she's one of the sweetest girls I know now. But he just... That's true, and he thought Jesus was tough. We should be tough, but know how to be gentle when we need to be, and he was.
I think that's an encouraging word, Todd, for people to hear that we can be men, but at the same time, everything in our heart and our ambition and our motivation changes, and I believe that begins to shift our parameters and how we live life, obviously. And that's what God does through Jesus Christ. He allows us to be us, but he allows us to do it in a different lane than we normally would do. You know, Todd, as you wrote the book and the movie producers got involved in it, and then all of a sudden it's on the big screen. I remember watching it going, oh my goodness, that inspired me so much. I wanted to go do, just wanted to go do something.
Yeah.
When you look at you and Jennifer, your wife, and I love both of you so much, you were able to go on the red carpet, hang out there with all that. What was that? Tell me a little bit.
It was surreal, Pastor Jacky. I mean, it was almost at times like I was like, man, that guy's so lucky. And I was talking about myself, like,
who is this guy?
Yeah, he's getting to do these things. Like Holly Rowe, who is a believer, interviewed me on the red carpet for a minute with ESPN, and I was like, this is nuts. I have a picture of me talking to her, and it was just bizarre, but it was also one of those things where you just knew God's in the middle of it. And I'll tell you something that I think is really interesting about the whole thing is that was 2015, so 11 years ago. I was a 47-year-old, whatever I was, a 46-year-old at the time. And I believe that the way God orchestrated it, he made it really, really clear early. Since I had not even finished the book, this didn't happen because I wrote a good book. God had produced a great story, and those guys bought that story without reading my book.
I get you.
And so God's saying, this is about me. You're getting to go along for the ride. And I knew it. I knew it all the way through. It was nothing about me. And I've been able to, it's been a great opportunity because it has given me a platform to be able to talk to people about Jesus and things that are important to me. And I'm just grateful. My wife knows that I always had a heart to be able to speak to people about things of God, and I didn't really have a platform for it. I was even trying to create platforms, reasons that somebody might want to listen to me, and God was like, just hang on.
I got you, just hang on.
and he did. And so that was really, it was just a very affirming thing that God sees us. He sees us. He knows us. And, we talk about the change and the inward motivation changing and things like that. And one of the things I want to say to the people who are watching this is that doesn't happen overnight. We're all works in progress. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been married to my wife coming up on 32 years, and I still blow it all the time. And God goes, see, you still need me. You still need a Savior. And so even through the process of this book, and that being a really big deal with the movie and all, God was doing it in a way that kept it from being about me, to protect me.
Sure. Yeah, he needs to protect us from us, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
He knows how to do that.
Yes, he does.
Todd, we got just a minute or two. If you had to say, Brother Jacky, this is the wrap-up thought, that you could look into this camera and speak to those people and go, I need to make sure you get this message,
Yeah.
what would it be?
You want me to look into the camera and do
Look
that?
into the camera and do that.
Like I said earlier in the conversation, desiring to do spectacular things for God is good, but sometimes that can become about us. God simply wants obedience. And I've quoted that verse that Jesus said, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you. And by this, the world will know that you're my disciples." If you will obey God and love well, watch what God does in your family, in the people around you, and in your own life. The gratification of a life lived that way will blow you away. That's about it.
That's awesome, man. Thank you, Todd. I love you, and I love Jennifer. I love your family. It's such an honor to have you with me today. I really appreciate it. I owe you a lot in relation to just being here and connecting with me and being my friend.
I love you, brother.
And I love you so much, man. And that's not because you just quoted that right here. I just love you, man. So you're my friend, and I appreciate you. Ladies and gentlemen, those of you that are tuned in this podcast, what a great, encouraging word to let get down in your heart. And I hope and pray that this has been inspirational to you. Todd and I could talk for a long, long time about that. So thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Lift Off with Brother Jacky.